Oh, baby, love it happened.
All right, let's get started. Thank you for joining us. I am Andrew Bartolotta, Director of Digital Media at cityCURRENT. Today we're going on a virtual tour of the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum, which was created by the Smithsonian Institution. It's an incredible museum, and we're so lucky to have Executive Director John Doyle joining us today to give us the behind-the-scenes tour as they celebrate their 20th anniversary this year at the corner of Beale in downtown Memphis. So let us know where you're joining us in the chat below and submit any questions you have for John about the museum. After the tour, we will have a short Q&A. Now let's have John give us a short history for the museum and get started with today's virtual tour.
Welcome, everybody. It's great to have folks in the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum, especially given the fact that COVID is disrupting tourism all over the place, but it's a great way to view a museum. Like Andrew said, we were started by the Smithsonian Institution 20 years ago. It was part of a research project to trace the origins of rock and soul music. And so as part of that, we started as that traveling exhibit that the Smithsonian put together, and then we became a full-fledged museum located, as Andrew said, right here in downtown Memphis. I'm going to give you a little bit of a tour as soon as I can determine how to make my phone turn around a little bit. Those of you that might not be aware of rock and soul, a little bit about the museum itself is we are located here at FedEx Forum. If you come to a Grizzlies game, you've probably seen that sign that you saw before when Andrew had the, when Andrew was showing things. But yeah, we're located right here at FedEx Forum as you enter to go into a Grizzlies game. FedEx Forum building their big new site right across the street in what was originally the Gibson Guitar Factory. I'm going to give you a quick tour. The cool thing is when you come into Rock and Soul, everybody receives audio guides just like these right here. So your audio guide is going to guide you through the tour. It's just a simple MP3 player. Everybody gets it as part of your admission into Rock and Soul. Since I'm here today, and actually since we're closed to the public today, I'm giving you a self-guided tour through the museum. One thing I want you to pay attention to as we go through, we opened on May the 21st, which was the same day that Graceland opened to the public. And we did so because of the way that the exhibit itself provides for social distancing for guests. And so it's a great place. If you're sick of being at home, if you're sick of working from home, you can come down to Rock and Soul, and we take great care of you. In the introductory theater, you see the stainless benches. We clean those after every use. We clean those headsets after every use. So Rock and Soul is a great place to have a great tourist experience, learn about Memphis, kind of have some self-pride about what your city is all about and really what your city accomplished, as told by the Smithsonian Institution. And that's what we're all about. And so we do keep people distanced. We do actually spray the museum every couple of days to make sure that we are perfectly safe and perfectly clean. So I'll give you a little more information also about special discounts for you guys that are tuning in today. And I'll do that at the end of the tour as well. Andrew, just let me know if I go too long. I often say as you come into Rock and Soul, it doesn't start out looking like a music museum. It looks like more of a history museum. It definitely looks like a Smithsonian museum, as you can see. There are touches of music, especially when you get started here. Kind of the cool thing about Rock and Soul, we work in partnership with the other music museums and attractions around the city, like Sun Studios, Stax Museum of American Soul Music, Graceland, obviously, the Blues Hall of Fame, the Memphis Music Hall of Fame, which is another one of our museums. But the cool thing about Rock and Soul, we lay that groundwork. If you really want to know how Elvis became Elvis, or how Memphis became the music city that changed the whole cultural complexion of the world, that's what the Smithsonian and what the Rock and Soul tells you here. It's about musicians that were on farms, that worked the fields, that plowed those fields with the mules, that picked cotton, and that came into the city during the Great Depression, and with it, they brought their music along as well. When we have a chance to do guided tours, we oftentimes tell that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was kind of could be considered the father of rock and roll, because Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he started New Deal initiatives to try to pull the country out of the Great Depression, along with that, it pushed a lot of those sharecroppers off of the farms. And as they came off the farms, they came into cities like Memphis. Here in the Delta, in the Mississippi Delta, farms around Arkansas, West Tennessee, and West Tennessee and Mississippi, obviously, they brought their music with them. Rock and Soul, as much as being a music museum, is also a civil rights museum. We love working in partnership with the National Civil Rights Museum that tells the civil rights story for our entire country and also for our city. Memphis tells a cool civil rights story about how Black musicians and white musicians came together at a time when our city was totally segregated, how our country was totally segregated. And I'll show you some kind of disturbing things about that as we go through the museum. It's also about influences of the church. You can see the pipe organ, which is a hand-carved pipe organ out of a church from Walls, Mississippi. That's dated 1928. I'm going to jump over a bunch of things because I want to show you some of my favorite cool pieces throughout the museum. This little thing right here, this is kind of cool. It's one of the oldest, it's definitely the oldest jukebox that we have on display. It's one of the oldest jukeboxes you're going to find. Obviously, you'll see the stacks in there where it stacked the records, and otherwise work pretty much like a regular jukebox. Right above it and behind it, that big monstrosity right there, that's the transformer from WSM Radio in Nashville, Tennessee. A lot of folks obviously think of Nashville as country music capital, which it is at the time when radio was mostly AM band rather than FM band, or obviously rather than satellite. A lot of folks picked up WSM broadcasts of the Grand Ole Opry. Folks who are old enough will remember Minnie Pearl, whose dress is displayed right there. But the Grand Ole Opry played into homes that had radios, folks that could afford radios, whether they were Black sharecroppers or white sharecroppers. Those radios or those phonograph records that sat on those tables or sat on the bedroom side table or sat on the kitchen tables, those brought the Grand Ole Opry and WSM radio into their homes. You'll find as you really study music, you'll see that country music has a strong influence both in contemporary, what we call white music, pop music, rock and roll, as well as in music that was originally traditionally Black music, such as soul, R&B, and even the blues. Kind of the rhythmic beat of country music can be seen in those. We kind of display this kind of melding together of the two races as you look at some of these musicians here. Jimmy Rogers, who was a great country musician. And then, of course, the legendary Robert Johnson right there. Believe it or not, Robert Johnson, who any blues enthusiast is going to know about Robert Johnson. He died when he was 27 years old. A lot of people speculate that his wife actually poisoned him because he wasn't the most faithful of husbands. But he died at what we oftentimes hear, and you've heard Eric Clapton sing about the crossroads. The crossroads down in North Mississippi at the intersection of Highway 61, which actually runs right beside Rock and Soul, which we used to call 3rd Street. We call B.B. King Boulevard right now. Robert Johnson allegedly sold his soul to the devil in order to become a great blues musician. When he first started performing there in North Mississippi, he wasn't that great of a musician. After he disappeared for a year, when he came back around the Mid-South, he had this incredible blues talent that is commemorated by many of today's contemporary artists. We come into this gallery as kind of an interesting thing. Again, we talk oftentimes about the Smithsonian putting rock and soul together. I've been here for 17 years, but I had worked at Rock and Soul, and we initially opened across the street, like I mentioned, in Gibson Guitar Factory, that's now becoming headquarters for FedEx. And we moved here into FedEx Forum. The Memphis Grizzlies are actually our landlords, which is a great partnership that works extremely well for a nonprofit museum like Rock and Soul. But I'd been here several years before I realized, and it was actually a Smithsonian person that pointed out to me, that the whole left side of this gallery deals with Black music. The whole right side of this gallery deals with Caucasian music. It goes more in depth than that. It deals a lot with the technology, or I guess if we called it technology at the time, it was technology for our parents and grandparents, such as old television sets and old radios. But we start with the Black music, and we really start with Beale Street. Kind of when I talked about one of the most cherished pieces of memorabilia that's in Rock and Soul, that's a little bit disturbing for a 2020 audience, are these two screen doors. These aren't reproductions. They came off of an actual retail establishment in North Mississippi. And it showed that vast segregation of blacks going through the door that was marked coloreds and whites going through the door that was marked whites. And you'll see many other echoes of that sort of a division all throughout rock and soul. You'll see things from Beale Street when they would do Thursday night was when whites would come down to Beale Street and listen to orchestras, blues musicians, and then most of the other streets. Beale Street was actually, as you'll learn from the videos in rock and soul, Beale Street wasn't just a music street the way that we kind of promote it now from a tourism standpoint. It was a business street. That's where black lawyers, black doctors, black insurance companies all worked along Beale Street. There were also hotels that catered to African-American musicians and guests. You'll hear, they tell over at the Stax Museum about musicians that were biracial groups such as Booker T and the MGs, and they would need to stay in hotels that cater to a black clientele because otherwise they wouldn't be allowed into other hotels. So it's an incredible story about really this role that Memphis played. Part of that role is also told in an incredible story about WDIA radio. It's incredible for several different reasons. It was the first African-American radio station in the country. It originally was owned by Caucasian ownership. Blacks were hired in order to speak on the microphone. They didn't actually operate the equipment such as the soundboard, pushing the buttons, playing the records, but they spoke on the microphones to the audience, which was catered towards an African-American audience. That changed eventually. Rufus Thomas tells in our museum about how when he learned how to operate the board, that's when WDIA truly became the legendary radio station it is that played to the communities in which it serves. The interesting thing also about WDIA, it's still on the air. It's still an incredibly strong radio station as far as ratings, despite being an AM radio station, and that's because of its strong commitment to the community. Also, at the time, WDIA was playing this music that was drawing white teenagers who were rebelling against the music that their parents listened to. Folks like Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Pat Boone, folks like that, as they began to rebel against the music their parents were listening to or the music that their parents tried to force them to listen to, they started looking for an alternative. And that alternative was something that their parents hated. It's something that their parents thought was rambunctious. Their parents maintained a lot of the racist views and stuff that we saw in mid-century here in the United States. And so white teenagers listening to black music was not a popular thing among many households throughout the South and certainly throughout the country. But that's what WDIA did. When I showed you there that red coat from WHBQ radio, WHBQ was the first radio station that played Elvis Presley. Kind of an interesting thing. The gentleman you see in the picture right there on top, that's Dewey Phillips. Dewey Phillips was this rambunctious style of radio disc jockey who had an evening radio show on WHBQ. Most of the daytime announcers were much more calm and laid back, just like the music that they played. At night, Dewey Phillips kind of turned it loose and played more rhythmic music and played a lot of African-American music because Caucasian radio stations were seeing an erosion of listeners as both black and white listeners began listening to black radio. Kind of a cool story I always love to tell. That's Dewey in his radio studio at WHBQ that was located on the mezzanine level of the Chiska Hotel. The Chiska Hotel is located one block out the back door of the Rock and Soul Museum, and of course, many of you know, is now incredible residential in downtown Memphis. When Dewey Phillips played his first Elvis record, which he played 14 to 17 times in a row, he asked to get an interview with Elvis, who was at a movie theater in downtown Memphis. And they brought Elvis down for the interview with Dewey Phillips. And during that interview, Dewey Phillips asked Elvis what high school he went to. When Elvis answered that he went to Humes High School, that was a telling tale, which told all of the radio listeners, who obviously couldn't see Elvis on the radio, that Elvis was a white musician, not a black musician, because Elvis was singing the music and mimicking the sound and the styles of black musicians. That is, in essence, the birth of rock and roll. You'll also see other things here in this museum, kind of a cool thing. most of us have seen jukeboxes like this, kind of a nostalgic style of jukebox. The coolest thing about the original and the very stylistic Wurlitzer jukebox is the changing lights and the flowing bubbles. I'll tell you a real quick story that doesn't have much to do with music, but other than jukeboxes. There were jukeboxes that were in a lot of the convenience stores or grocery stores of the days. They were also in diners and things like that. That's where music was played, in restaurants, diners, small grocery stores. There was a salesman for a soft drink by the name of Dr. Pepper. And he had come into these convenience stores with new signage that went into the stores that Dr. Pepper did in that big battle against the whole soft drink wars and trying to gain space against Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, and RC Cola. So Dr. Pepper came up with these signs that sat in these stores and these grocery stores and these diners that had bubbles and had changing lights. And a sales guy from Wurlitzer came into one of those diners, saw it, went back to Wurlitzer Jukebox headquarters, told about it. From that moment, Wurlitzer began incorporating the bubbles and the lights in their Wurlitzer jukeboxes, making them world famous and pretty much the iconic symbol of jukeboxes. Speaking of iconic things, after you go through this gallery and you've got Caucasian on the right and you've got African Americans on the left, you come into this gallery, which you'll see the Sun Studios console right in front of you. This is also, as I spoke about how rock and soul, it was kind of like the epicenter of rock and soul when black and white music came together. And it also happened in a small studio right down on Union Avenue that most of y'all know about because it's one of our city's biggest tourist attractions, and that's Sun Studios, which obviously was Sun Records. It was actually Memphis Recording Service, and the label that was recorded at Memphis Recording Service was on the Sun Records label. Sam Phillips started it. Sam Phillips was a radio guy that then got into recorded music. The kind of a cool, interesting thing I'll tell you about is one of his talent scouts. But what really happened at Sun Studios, Sun originally recorded black music. Not just music, but they also recorded African-American ceremonies. It could be a wedding ceremony. It could be a funeral. It could be a church ceremony. But he had portable equipment that he would take and he would record. And then he began having talent scouts go down into the Mississippi Delta, and they would find musicians who they would bring back to Sun Studios to record. After a while, Sam wanted to expand his business, and to expand his business, he was looking at exactly what I talked about in that last gallery, combining black music with white music in order to build a bigger audience and attract white teenagers to product that he was putting out at Sun Studios. There's another cool Elvis story, and I'll try not to bog you down with Elvis stories. Graceland can take care of that better than rock and soul can. But Elvis came into Sun Studios and actually recorded 4 times before the legendary recording session that we call the birth of rock and roll. And actually, Sam Phillips wasn't too impressed with Elvis Presley. When he recorded the first 4 times, some of those times, Sam didn't even use the product that Elvis recorded. He thought he was a mediocre talent at best. There was a famous recording session in July of 1954 when Elvis, Scotty Moore, and Bill Black were in the studio, and Sam was trying to get some product out. And what they were doing, Elvis, who wanted to be a music star, was singing the music of music stars, which, as I said, at the day were Pat Boone and folks like that. So these guys were doing crooner music when that's not what Sam was looking for. It came at a time when they took a break from recording, that the teenagers then began playing what they liked playing, not what they thought the musical audience wanted. And so they started just jamming on their musical instruments and playing some black music. One of those being That's All Right Mama, which had been recorded by Arthur Crudup, which lyrics were taken from an earlier blues musician, Blind Lemon Jefferson, and that became That's All Right Mama, which many people maintain is the first rock and roll record of all times. Folks in Cleveland, Ohio might differ with me, but that's the truth. A little bit about Elvis. There's his yearbook right there. The black guitar that you'll see right there, that's the guitar that he serenaded Priscilla when he was in the armed forces in Germany. Obviously, he didn't take a guitar into the armed forces, but when he got to Germany, he bought a low-priced German brand guitar, an Asana guitar, and that's what you'll see right there. You'll also see some of Elvis's army fatigues and other costumes. So we're looking more like a music museum at this point. On your audio guides now, you're listening to things about Sun Records, and you're listening to incredible hip music that we still recognize today by folks like Jerry Lee Lewis, whose costumes you'll see there. Very easily recognizable costumes by Johnny Cash. I'll tell you a very incredible story about Johnny Cash's black coat in just a second. Roy Orbison, Carl Perkins, etc. That microphone that you see right there, that was the original microphone that Blue Suede Shoes was recorded by Carl Perkins. A lot of people associate it with Elvis Presley, but Carl Perkins recorded that song. Let's go back to the Man in Black. There's an incredible story, and you'll need to go to our sister museum that's a block away off of Beale Street, and that's the Memphis Music Hall of Fame. Adjoining the Memphis Music Hall of Fame is an incredible clothing store called Lansky Brothers Clothing Store. It was originally owned by Bernard Lansky. It was on Beale Street, and then it was in the original building where the Memphis Music Hall of Fame is located now. And one day, this young teenage Johnny Cash came into the Lansky Brothers clothing store, and he was holding a Prince Albert tobacco can. Many of you might not recognize what a Prince Albert tobacco can looks like, but many of us, especially older folks, will recognize kind of the iconic metal can that had a picture of England's Prince Albert. And he was wearing a black coat just like that, kind of a long tailored black coat. And Johnny Cash went into Lansky Brothers down on Beale Street, where Memphis Music Hall of Fame is, and asked Mr. Lansky, can you find me a coat like that? They went upstairs and bought what many believe was his very first black coat, which then led to him being the Man in Black. It's kind of a goosebump feeling when you go into the second floor exhibit space at the Memphis Music Hall of Fame and realize that the Man in Black persona could have been formed right there in our own hometown on the second floor, right above Lansky Brothers Clothing Store. Pop Tunes, another iconic retail establishment that was in Memphis. Again, thanks to Bernard Lansky's son, Hal Lansky. This is on loan to the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum, because Poplar Tunes played a critical role in the birth of rock and roll, and really the whole expansion of rock and roll, because since Memphis was the epicenter of this new thing called rock and roll, Pop Tunes played the music. Sam Phillips from Sun Studios would take 45 records just pressed down to Poplar, right there where Poplar Danny Thomas is, and would take those 45s into Pop Tunes for those to be played. Pop Tunes also printed out a paper chart. I've compared it many times to iTunes or Apple Music or something like that, where we go to listen to new music oftentimes, or we go to the internet streaming sources in order to listen to new music. What was happening at this time, because of lack of internet, of course, Pop Tunes printed out a chart of the songs that were selling, the records that were selling there at Pop Tunes. Since a lot of them were coming from this big explosion of new music that was coming out of Memphis, other radio stations and other record stores across the country would get their hands on the printed paper charts from Pop Tunes in Memphis, Tennessee. And that's how rock and roll really expanded itself across the globe. Just in case you're bored, there's the back door, so you can run out of the back door of the museum. Anyway, I spoke a little bit about the talent scouts from Sun Records who would go down into the Mississippi Delta in order to find great blues talent. Folks like Albert King, or folks like Howlin' Wolf. These types of folks who Sam Phillips would bring into the studio. This piano here is the original piano of Ike Turner. Ike Turner was a great legendary musician. He wrote and played on this piano a record called Rocket 88. If you're not familiar with it, go online and search the thing. Many folks argue against my claim a minute ago about Elvis's That's All Right Mama being one of the first rock and roll records, and they claim that Rocket 88 was the first rock and roll record. It's kind of ironic, one recorded by a Caucasian, one recorded by an African American. The other interesting thing, other than the fact that many of us recognize Ike Turner as the abusive husband of legendary Tina Turner, who's also a member of the Memphis Music Hall of Fame, close to Memphis from Nutbush, Tennessee. Aside from being her husband and part of course, Ike and Tina Turner Review that you'll see in the photo right behind the piano, Ike Turner also served as talent scout at Sun Records and located many of those blues musicians. So he deserves credit. He deserves credit for a lot of those blues musicians' music being laid down on vinyl when otherwise it would have been lost if it had just been played in the Mississippi Delta. If I can share another cool story, at least I think it's cool, about the legendary B.B. King, who obviously also is from Memphis, Tennessee. B.B. King, which his name really is Riley B. King, but he adopted the name of B.B., which stood for Bill Street Blues Boy. B.B. King played this particular guitar, the black one that you see right there, and those guitars, which are called Lucille. Those of you who are in the know about music, you're well familiar with the Lucille guitar that's produced by Gibson Guitar Company. And the Lucille guitar is, of course, tied directly to B.B. King. That was his guitar. One of the first and only musicians that ever named their guitar early on. But there's a cool story about it. When he first started playing, B.B. King was a cab driver and held many other odd jobs and did music on the side, but he wanted to be a music star just like Elvis Presley did. And as he began, he would play a lot of juke joints all around the Mid-South. And he was playing in a grocery store in Twist, Arkansas. If you need a weekend field trip, you can drive right across or ride your bike across Big River Crossing and go over into Arkansas. Not far from that, you're going to find a small little community that's the leftovers of Twist, Arkansas. And in that was a small grocery store. At night, they pushed the shelves of canned goods against the walls and turned it into a juke joint for live music to make extra money. It was heated by kerosene heaters because of, that's the way they did it back then. And BB was playing a gig there one particular night. In the middle of it, a fire erupted and the whole place caught on fire. Of course, you can imagine it's an old wood-framed grocery store, and it went up in flames quick. BB ran out of the place just like the other band members did, and just like those that were the patrons that were there in the juke joint. They got out to this gravel parking lot next to it, and BB realized that he had left his guitar inside. Guitars weren't cheap for a struggling blues musician, especially an African-American blues musician in the day. And he raced back into the flames in order to recover, hopefully, his prized guitar. At that time, it was his only means of making a living. So he did go in and he did get the guitar, and he did manage to bring it back out. A little bit later, they found out that there were two gentlemen sitting at the bar at that little juke joint, and they got into a little argument. And as the argument erupted into a fight, they turned over one of those kerosene heaters and caught the grocery store on fire. They came to find out the two guys were fighting over the affection of a waitress that worked there who, coincidentally, was of the name of Lucille. After that point, from then on, B.B. King named his guitars Lucille. And the reason he did was because he always wanted to remind himself that he was to treat his guitar as kindly as he would treat his woman and never leave it behind. B.B. was one of the only musicians, until he passed away several years ago, one of the only musicians who, despite road handlers and roadies and things like that we have at contemporary concerts today, B.B. would always walk onto the stage with his guitar and walk off the stage with his guitar, and he would never leave it behind. Of course, aside from rock and roll, soul music is a huge thing that came out of Memphis, Tennessee. Really, you look at the two huge music cities in regards to R&B and soul music, you're going to look at Detroit and, of course, legendary Motown. And you're going to look at Memphis and legendary labels like Stax Records and High Records, among others. Stax Records, again, similar to the last gallery, you're going to see a lot of memorabilia from some famous folks. This lady right here is less famous, but her role as far as the explosion of soul music out of Memphis, Tennessee is huge. That's a coat and shoes and purse of Estelle Axton. Estelle Axton, her brother started a recording studio outside of Memphis and then tried to move the studio into the city of Memphis. And the only place he could find that he could afford to convert into a recording studio was a movie theater. So he purchased a movie theater on McLemore Avenue, And that's where the legendary Stax came from. And that legendary marquee that we see constantly on tourism stuff coming out of Memphis, Tennessee, is a replica of the original marquee that was on that movie theater. The Stax Museum of American Soul Music, it was rebuilt and built as a replica of the original Stax studio that stood there on McLemore. Estelle Axton, her brother was Jim Stewart. Jim Stewart ran Stax Records for many years. Originally, it was called Satellite Records, but they were sued by a company by the name of Satellite Records out of California, so they changed the name. They took Jim Stewart's first two initials of his last name and Miss Axton's first two initials of her last name to form Stax Records. Stax recorded many of the legends that we hear constantly on sports commercials, radio commercials, etc., all the time. The flamboyant Isaac Hayes, you'll see his Wolverine cape right there. You'll see his mink coat right there. You'll see the outfit from Carla Thomas. You'll see musical instruments by Booker T and the MGs, who I referenced earlier. This is going to divide cityCURRENT's audience as far as age. Those are 8-track tapes. My parents had 8-track tapes. I remember 8-track tapes. My son doesn't have a clue what an 8-track tape is. But 8-track tapes were a source of music that's now gone by the wayside, soon followed by cassette tapes. And before long, will be followed by CDs as well. Aside from the legendary Stax Records, there's also High Records, Royal Studios, which was run by one of the owners of Pop Tunes originally and was later purchased by Willie Mitchell. Willie Mitchell's, that's his picture right there in the center, and his outfit that's right above it. Willie Mitchell was a big band producer on Beale Street and also ran Royal Studios as a producer until he purchased the studios. And one of the iconic things that he accomplished after he became the owner of Royal Studios was he brought this guy from up north that he had heard down to record at Royal Studios. And that young gentleman at the time was Al Green, later to become Reverend Al Green, still an icon in Memphis, Tennessee, still pastoring a church a few blocks away from Graceland there in Whitehaven, and leads the music there. That church, every Sunday, pretty much, unless he's out on tour, Reverend Green is there, and half the audience is his congregation, and usually about half of the audience is tourists from out of town who want to see Al Green pastoring his church. You also have items there from Ann Peebles, Ace Cannon, and many others that are here in the Soul Music Gallery. I'm skipping some things, but the reason for that is because then y'all have to come to the Rock and Soul Museum. As we come down this final hallway here, of course, despite the fact that we have this mothership here in town, which is Elvis's house, Graceland, you can't be a music museum in Memphis, Tennessee without having artifacts from Elvis, and we have a couple of very cool ones. There's an incredible movie poster here from one of his movies, a movie poster that was, of course, displayed in Italy, as you can tell by the writing on the movie poster. When you look at these two items here, of course, you see a jumpsuit from Elvis Presley, and then you also just see one of his uniforms there. The kind of the cool thing about these two being on display here in the Rock and Soul Museum, they are displayed as much of our memorabilia is on little platforms, just to separate it from the regular carpet folks walk on. But here at Rock and Soul, our staff will frequently see footsteps on that little platform right at Elvis's feet, because people will step up on that platform because the jumpsuit looks taller than they think it should look. It also looks thinner than they think it should look. When Elvis began wearing jumpsuits, he didn't begin wearing jumpsuits because he was gaining weight. That was the style, that just the way that many musicians bring their own style into fashion and etc. That was his style that he made famous. The rhinestone jumpsuits, and then later the capes that matched each of the jumpsuits. He was tall. He wasn't, he was a pretty tall guy, and he also wore a size 13 shoe. So Elvis wasn't a small guy. Some of you will remember later in life, he practiced karate and things like that. He, did try to stay athletic some. He used to play football outside on the fields outside of Humes High School with other classmates and things like that. But his height certainly added to his sports prowess as well, not to mention his music prowess. And speaking of his music, I've got to get close here, and you will have to come to see this because we keep the light levels low, but these are the handwritten lyrics to Suspicious Minds, one of Elvis's most famous songs. It's kind of a cool thing. The lyrics were handwritten by Mark James, who originally wrote that song, actually recorded that song before Elvis recorded it and made it the colossal hit that it was. But these are the handwritten lyrics of that. And you'll recognize the lyrics, of course, because you've heard the song a million times. Make sure when you come to Rock and Soul, pay close attention because, as I probably would have done, suspicious is misspelt 3 times in the original lyrics to Suspicious Minds. If you're into handwritten lyrics, we have some typed lyrics over there to Hound Dog as well. Over at the Memphis Music Hall of Fame, we also have handwritten lyrics by Johnny Cash, which feature some kind of cool notes written in the margin and that sort of thing. Coming into the 70s, a couple of different bands that I want to hit on real quick. One, Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. Sam Samudio, who is still alive and who is actually a poet and one of the coolest guys you could ever meet because he's very philosophical. He started Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. He began wearing the sequin coats and, of course, the turbans to match the name of the band. The band members wore tunics, just like Egyptians. None of them were Egyptian. Sam looks a little Egyptian, but Sam is Mexican, actually. You'll see that record down there on the bottom, his Hard and Heavy album. He won a Grammy Award for the liner notes for that record, again, being a great wordsmith. And he wrote the liner notes for that album, and that album also won a Grammy Award for him. When the Smithsonian was collecting memorabilia and they visited Sam at his house to get that turban and that gold coat, Sam said, you know, that motorcycle I'm sitting on in that album I won a Grammy for, that motorcycle's in my garage. So, of course, Rock and Soul snatched it up as quick as we could. Other bands that kind of came out in Memphis and other things that need to be of note in Memphis in later years prior to Timberlake becoming a big star out of Memphis, Tennessee. You have other iconic bands like the Gentrys, the Box Tops, many others. A little bit later, you have the Antenna Club, where Memphis became kind of one of the stops as far as, and one of the leaders as far as the growth of punk rock, especially here in the South. And then you also have Big Star. Big Star recorded at Ardent Studios. If you go to Overton Square and you head towards downtown on your right-hand side, you're going to see a brick building. That's Ardent Studios. ZZ Top is recorded there. Big Star recorded their albums there. Allman Brothers Band and many others I'll show you in a second recorded there. But Big Star, although lesser known here in Memphis and their life as a band was kind of short-lived, they had a humongous influence on bands that came out of Europe. Of course, we also talk here as we kind of conclude with the Smithsonian exhibit in the Rock and Soul Museum. We talk about the assassination of Dr. King. It's not a story that we try to tell over the National Civil Rights Museum, but there is an incredible story about that gentleman you see there on the left by the name of Ben Branch, who was another orchestra leader out of Memphis who performed a lot on Beale Street. And on the day that Dr. King was assassinated, Ben Branch was in the parking lot of the Lorraine Hotel, which of course is now the National Civil Rights Museum. And while he was there, Dr. King, before he left to go to a dinner that he was going to at a lady's house with others, such as Jesse Jackson was with him, and Dr. King asked Ben Branch if he would play his favorite hymn, which was Precious Lord, Take My Hand, which was the final song that was played right there in the parking lot in downtown Memphis before the dreadful assassination of Dr. King. We talk about a lot of the influences of African-American culture and a lot of the ways that African-American products, etc. Memphis being a divided racially town, not divided in a negative aspect, but really being a multiracial city. You also see right there Aretha Franklin, who was born in Memphis, Tennessee. Many folks might have heard the news stories of her childhood home there on Lucy, close to the Stax Museum. But I had a reporter from the New York Times come through who asked, could rock and roll have been formed in any other city other than Memphis, Tennessee? Kind of in conclusion, and then of course, like Andrew mentioned, I'll take questions if you have any. Kind of the interesting thing, and the thing that I told that reporter from the New York Times, it could have happened in another city, but it had to be a city on a river because the river had a major influence, not just because the theme of the river, but also it was such an industrial mode of transportation. Of course, with the cotton industry, it also helped to make Memphis a majority African-American city at the time. It also had to be a city that was biracial. You had to have black people and you had to have white people. You had to have influences of country music. You had to have influences of gospel music that was happening here in Memphis from the many churches here. And so all of these influences had to come together in order for rock and roll to really ever come to pass. And it happened right here in Memphis. It's a cool thing. You know, if you're into contemporary music, if you think that Memphis focuses too much on that legacy, the names that we've been talking about before, from Roy Orbison and Booker T and the MGs, et cetera, please recognize how the city that you live in right now is known worldwide because of what happened here in Memphis, Tennessee. And it wasn't a slow musical progression like we saw in Seattle when grunge music became popular in Seattle, or other music influences that happened throughout the United States. But it was an explosion. It was an explosion of black musicians and white musicians playing together. And so you should really know that. Memphis is a medium-sized city in the United States. We're not New York, we're not Dallas, we're not Houston. But you go to any country in the world and you ask them about Memphis, Tennessee, not only might they mention Elvis, but they're going to mention music. The Smithsonian maintains that English is the primary language of business around the world because music that came out of Memphis, Tennessee, primarily the birth of rock and roll, taught these countries that were non-English speaking countries. They learned our language by singing our music, as music from Memphis, Tennessee spread around the globe, and rock and roll had this humongous influence. And therefore, English became a primary language around the world. You can't go to any country and mention Memphis and they don't know about that city. Something that we have a lot to be proud of, the great things that cityCURRENT does. Music's definitely a part of it, things that we should be proud of here in our city. I mentioned to you a special offer. We'd love to have y'all come visit Rock and Soul. I would like every Memphian to, or every Mid-Southerner to, see this museum and know about this museum just because of the great story that it tells, but also it's going to build a real sense of pride in your own heart and in your own soul. And so between now and the end of September, please break away from your quarantine and come downtown. When you come into Rock and Soul, mention cityCURRENT to anyone at our front desk, and we'll give you half price admission to the Rock and Soul Museum. I appreciate the time. I appreciate all that cityCURRENT does, and we appreciate the opportunity to kind of show off this great museum that we're real proud of. Andrew?
John, thank you so much. Your passion.
You're welcome, sir.
Preserving Memphis history, Mid-South history, and just the beautiful music is incredible, and we're so appreciative of it. We do have some questions.
Sure.
One of them is, with a lot of children learning remote this year, they're wondering if there are any educational opportunities for children to learn from the Rock and Soul Museum.
Yeah, there are. We actually have a pretty extensive 48-page curriculum guide that is on our website. There's a reduced version that just kind of has some different lesson plans that are there, but we have a full 48-page that's broken down into different school subjects as well as different school grades. And so there are things for elementary kids, junior high, senior high, obviously, dealing with all different aspects of Memphis music. And we put that together in conjunction with the University of Memphis. And so it's a great resource. There's also a lot of videos that are on our website, also on our YouTube channel. Kind of one of the cool things about Rock and Soul that we're trying to do more during this COVID virus time. When the Smithsonian put Rock and Soul together, they captured 60 different interviews with legendary musicians, from Sam Phillips, B.B. King, Isaac Hayes, Carl Perkins, etc. And we have access to all of those. And so we've been re-editing some of those and making some of those available online as well. We're also working with Mayor Harris's office in Shelby County as far as trying to work something out so that we can offer free admission to Shelby County school students to come through Rock and Soul during this year, since they are isolated from a lot of learning experiences and field trips that they're accustomed to as well. And so we'll keep everyone posted on that as we try to finalize details on that as well.
Great, thank you. And what are some ways we can support the museum and your efforts during this time?
That's a great question. I appreciate that. We are a not-for-profit museum. All of our revenue is earned from donors and supporters, people who come and buy stuff from that gift shop right there. And so we appreciate anything anyone wants to do. Of course, coming to the museum, you know, if we give you half price admission, you might be kind enough to drop the other half price of that ticket onto purchasing a Rock and Soul or a Memphis Music Hall of Fame t-shirt or something. But additionally, if you want to make a donation, you can go to our website. There's a donation page on our website. You can also text the word music to 56512. 56512, text music. You can give $1 or you can give $10,000 or whatever you want to give. We appreciate it very much. We, you know, those who donate to us, we're very grateful. And just kind of as a final story right there, we were very fortunate because a little guy that recorded a few songs by the name that I mentioned previously, Justin Timberlake, did a $100,000 donation to the museum several years ago, specifically for our education program. So any support's greatly appreciated, but primarily we have a mission to preserve and tell the story of Memphis music and perpetuate its legacy. Any way that you guys can help do that by supporting live music in town, supporting musicians, buying product from musicians online or at their gigs, now that gigs are starting to come back, and really supporting musicians is something that is strong to our heart. So we appreciate folks that do that as well.
Thank you, John. And as we close out, are there any songs that come to your mind that will help us as we continue to work from home, socially distanced, that that you may hear when you come to the Rock and Soul Museum that were recorded in Memphis or the area?
Definitely. Would you like for me to sing a few of them?
Yes, absolutely.
No, but going to one particular group, and it's hard to pick out one particular song, but I keep hearing it resonating and over, and folks using their work over and over. And that's the Staple Singers. The Staple Singers, which was originated as a gospel group formed by Pop Staples with his daughters and his one son. The only remaining member of the Staple Singers is obviously the great Mavis Staples. But yeah, go on Apple Music or something and just listen through their work. They began, again, as I mentioned, as gospel singers, but then it was at the time of protest when we were in the midst of the Vietnam War, et cetera. And so they kind of turned to protest music. You can learn more about that also as I speak about different things we have available. Our project manager, Ezra Wheeler, produces a podcast called Memphis Musicology in support of Rock and Soul, on behalf of Rock and Soul. And he does such an incredible job because he goes very in depth on different topics, such as protest music, such as novelty music that came out of Memphis. I talked about Estelle Axton, who helped found Stax Records. After she left Stax Records, she actually opened another recording studio and recorded Disco Duck with Rick Dees. And so we sure have that to hang our hats on as well. But anyway, he gives some great podcasts. Go and check out some of those. You'll learn a whole lot about your city and you'll learn a lot about the music. But if you really want to feel better about the world right now, if you'll go listen to some of the protest music by the Staple Singers, you'll feel better in the midst of a COVID virus. You'll feel better in the midst of us embracing Black Lives Matter, because they felt that at the time. Unfortunately, they were going through the same things that we've been fighting against here recently through some of the protests. It's a shame that they've lasted this long, but their music still resonates today and are great. You know, they really provide great anthems for people to celebrate today as we begin making some changes.
Well, John, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you for everyone else that joined us today. We'll close out with some music that we all know and love, and we appreciate everyone joining us today.